Hello, everyone. We're so sorry for the delay. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, but we're excited to get started with our second speaker in our Social Change Career Series. Today we have Dr. Damary Bonilla-Rodriguez, and she's having a little bit of computer issues, so you'll be able to hear her voice, but you may not be able to see her webcam a little bit in this conversation. I'm also joined by two of my colleagues, Heather Mercer and Jade Vega, and they may be asking questions as well. If you have questions for the speaker, you can type them in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as possible, hopefully. Anything that we don't get to in the conversation will be able to answer via email. So definitely add your questions to the chat, and thank you so much for joining us. So Damary, why don't you introduce us to yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to this topic?
Sure. So I say that my bio says that I am a mother, and I think that's an important aspect in who I am. And so I say that I'm a mother, a wife, a mentor, an active member of my community in various roles, and a person who wears many hats. And I consider myself to be an agent of change and someone who is paying attention to everything that is happening, whether it's positive or negative, so that I can think about how to make a difference in society on a small scale and ultimately on a larger scale. And I think having grown up in what is considered a negative environment, negative statistics based on where I was born and who I was born to, my ethnic background, being a female, and just being part of disenfranchised groups in U.S. society, I think all of that has brought me to a place of wanting to achieve more, wanting to make a positive impact on society, and just working towards that every day.
Great. I think all mothers, don't we all kind of wear many hats? And so it's great that you start with that being part of your bio, but it's just one of the many things that make you who you are, and it's exciting to have you here today. I'd like to let my colleagues also introduce themselves really briefly. Just tell us who you are and a little bit about what you're studying with us with the SISGI group.
Okay, I will go first. I'm Jade, and I've been studying disabilities, human rights, and LGBTQI plus issues, and I'm actually working on starting a diversity and inclusion business, so that's also interesting to me. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Jade. And Heather?
Hi, I'm Heather Mercer, and I am interested in women with a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome. After hearing about a pretty haunting statistic that 93 women with a prenatal diagnosis decide to terminate, my mission has been to educate and support these women. And so my work with the SISGI group includes sharing information and trying to get the awareness out there.
Great, thank you, Heather. And for everyone, I'm Sanara Bailey. I'm the president and CEO of the SISGI Group, and we are a nonprofit and consulting group focused on strategic resources for mission-driven work. So, Damary, tell us a little bit about kind of what does a typical day, week, month, whatever is most typical, look like in your role. I think sometimes when you hear the term leadership development or leadership expert or speaker, it comes across a little buzzwordy. So what does that?
I think this is definitely a fun question. Because I'm a mom and wear many hats, as we've talked about, I do try to plan ahead, look at my schedule for the coming days, weeks, and months. But when it comes to actually handling things, I focus one day at a time, 1 week at a time. So what is it that I have scheduled for this week, and thinking about how I'm going to juggle all of those important roles and responsibilities. And so my answer is that there's not a typical day. I do travel a lot for work and for private endeavors, and so some days are quiet. I work from home on a day-to-day basis if I'm not traveling, so those days can be productive and completing projects and crossing things off the list. But then there are other days that are super busy with travel, in which case family comes in because you have to figure out childcare and be sure that everything is in order at home while you're away, and there's packing and preparing your materials for a presentation. And so at that point, you're almost wearing all the hats at one time, and things are a little bit crazy. So no 2 days are alike, which I think is a great part about developing yourself and doing different things throughout your journey.
I'm sure there are many people who feel like they have a background or expertise in a certain topic and would like to kind of segue that into either speaking opportunities or to be seen as an expert. We do research for you. You received your doctorate and looked at particularly leadership for Latinas in your research. How do you think someone kind of takes that experience, those skills, and segues into that work?
Absolutely. I think when it comes to working with people in the social sector in various roles, whether you're in nonprofit management, like I am in my day-to-day, in my day-to-day role, which pays the bills, right, and helps me develop on a daily basis, or speaking engagements and sharing what it is that you've researched or your areas of expertise that you have developed over the years of different roles and work, I think you definitely need to hone and tap those people skills, the opportunity to communicate effectively with others, no matter what their role is, no matter where they are, being able to work as an individual. So if you're on the road and you're traveling for a speaking engagement, or if you're traveling for your daily work, but then also being able to collaborate with others, whether it's an internal audience to the organization you work with, or externally with partner agencies, and or developing those business relationships. So I think communication is key. I think preparation is key. So what I talked about in the beginning, being sure that you are looking ahead, even if you have those crazy days, and also having a mission. So if you're working for a particular organization, being mission driven, personally committed to and tied to that mission, as well as having a personal mission of what is it that you want to bring to whatever it is that you do, if it's a speaking engagement or if it's your day-to-day work, and what do you want to contribute as an individual to that role that you're stepping into. In terms of speaking opportunities, exposure and making yourself available to others is definitely a segue into having that opportunity. And also watching others when they're speaking, and what is it that they do well, and how would you go about it yourself, and what would you enjoy about it, and sort of packaging all of that, and then doing some outreach to market yourself.
Great. I know, you have your doctorate and have spent, of course, education to get ready for this work that you're doing, but what kind of other skills do you think someone needs to be in this position? And do you think that the doctorate is just a nice benefit and maybe strengthens your opportunities, or do you think it's kind of a requirement to be taken seriously in the work that you're doing?
That's a great question. I definitely am an advocate for accessing education. And when I say education, I refer to the formal setting, which is earning a new degree, a higher degree, a doctorate included. There aren't a lot of people in American society that have a doctorate, but there are more women at a rapid pace, right, accessing doctorate and doctoral level research, as well as more people of color. And so it is an exciting time in education, but educating yourself on a day-to-day basis. So taking part in conversations like this one, where you can pick up nuggets and information and wisdom from others who are doing the work or have done the work, accessing conferences and opportunities that you may pass by because you don't have time or you don't have the funds to invest in yourself. And so I would definitely say that investing in yourself and accessing education, whether formal or informal, are the way to go. I think doctorate is not a requirement for the work that I do, but it definitely has enhanced my leadership abilities. It also gives you credibility within different fields and in different places, and working with different people, that you have studied an area of expertise, that you have committed a certain amount of time and a certain amount of money and energy to complete this journey. And so that does give you a level of credibility that is helpful, paired with the people skills and some of the other things that I touched on, definitely position you to be successful. But I think the speaking, the actual speaking, standing in front of a crowd. You can be a manager, you can be a leader in your organization or in your community and still have some issues with public speaking. And so taking the opportunity to practice and to take courses like Toastmaster, I think, are definitely good opportunities.
Great. I think Jade has a question for you. And Damary, one thing I thought of that might make it a little less having to look at the black screen is if you turn off your camera, we should at least get your little avatar on the screen for when you're talking. But Jade, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah. So I'm thinking of pursuing my doctorate, and I know you just mentioned one thing, which is Toastmasters, but I'm wondering, while you were in your program, what are some things that you did to prepare for being an expert in this field and for your career that you have now?
Sure. So I have always been interested in work in the social sector, and I have always worked for my community and for women and for people that I feel have been in disadvantaged situations. And so that was a personal passion. So I would say that tapping your personal passion and thinking about what I mentioned earlier about having a mission are two key things. Really understanding what is it that's of interest to you and being able to learn about those topics. And so I loved hearing the different topics that you all are engaged with and why you decided to pursue studying and trying to make a difference in that particular area. And so the pursuit of the doctorate is actually taking that to the next level. You have an area of interest, you want to make a difference in society, you're passionate and personally committed to something, and then you take that to the next level to contribute to society through a written piece, through research and a different kind of contribution. And then following that, you're able to leverage that to be able to speak to audiences about it and to continue versing yourself. So I say that I'm a lifelong learner. I learn from every conversation, and I don't go to a session or an opportunity to teach, but I go to facilitate conversation and ensure that we're talking about topics that are important to make a positive influence and change in society.
Great. Any other questions from either you, Heather, or Jade, or anyone in the audience? If you have questions, feel free to type them and we will add them to the conversation.
Danara, do you see the avatar at this point? I turned it off.
We are seeing the avatar, which does make it a little less black screen, which is great.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but I'm still excited to
Hey, technology, what can you say? It's never works when you want it to, right?
Exactly.
Heather, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just was going to ask you to expound a little bit more, Damary. You had mentioned earlier that just being a woman and being in the ethnic group that you're a part of and the neighborhood that you're born in, there were many barriers to your ability to maybe move forward, or maybe that could have made you feel, discouraged in any way. How would you encourage somebody that's feeling in the same spot, and how can you teach them to maybe overcome those barriers, or how can they move forward in a way that they can be successful as yourself?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. I personally am committed to ensuring that anyone that wants to access education or career shifts or just develop themselves and their leadership abilities is successful in doing that. So I do mentor a lot of students and a lot of doctoral students, particularly women. And so we have this conversation on a weekly basis about how they're able to get to the next level. And so the first thing that I advise is to take your circumstances and use them to your advantage, as opposed to viewing them as a disadvantage, right? So you were born into poverty, you were born as a female, you were born into all of these boxes and labels that society has for different populations and different demographic groups. And for those of us who were born into several of those categories, we're starting off at the bottom. And so not thinking about what has been set up for you, because if I'd done that, I would have been set up to fail, but thinking about what is it that you need to do to get out of that box. And it's not so much about proving yourself to others as it is to yourself, to saying, this is something that I want to do, this is something that I'm going to do because I know that I can. And that's where tapping your passions and your interests comes into play, and then reversing yourself, whether, as I said, formal or informal, it comes into play. Investing in yourself is key, but then also going outside the box. And if you are applying for an internship or a position, that you apply for things that you may not have done before, but that you believe that you have the skill set to do. And so not limiting yourself and being able to go into places that are higher than you originally set for yourself, right? So continuing to push that bar so that you can continue to exceed your own expectations. And I feel like by default, you exceed others' expectations as you do that, and you're paving the way for other people in your position or in similar positions to do the same.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jay, did you have a question?
Yeah. So I was actually reading your article, What Glass Ceiling, on the Huffington Post, and you really underline the importance of having a broad, connected professional network. And that's, at times, that's really difficult to do, especially if you're someone like me who has like a virtual school experience and limited professional experience. So I was wondering, for someone interested in doing the same type of work that you're doing, are there any organizations or groups that you would recommend for someone to join for professional networking purposes?
Absolutely. That's a great question, and I feel like I've talked about that a lot lately because everyone is looking for that opportunity to expand their network. And so I want to touch on that first, that the fact that networking is key. I think, as you said, everybody sort of knows that having an extensive network is going to be helpful, right? And that you have to meet people and cultivate those relationships. So I think being able to, whether virtually or in person, connect with others is going to be key. Leveraging LinkedIn cannot be stressed enough. It's an opportunity to reach out to someone in a field that might be of interest to you. And so, as I said, I'm a lifelong learner, and there are things that I want to learn about. So I'll connect with someone on LinkedIn, and I'll set up some time to chat with them and learn about what it is that they did, right? And so never feeling like you know too much or like you know it all about a particular area. And so what I'm trying to say, Jade, is that you're not alone. Even though I'm on this side of the microphone today, I'm still always doing that same thing. And so practicing expanding my network all the time. Asking people, often people are willing to share what their experiences have been, share skills and information that you might need. There are a lot of great organizations that are doing things virtually, and I do want to tell you that I started my doctoral journey in a web-based program and completed a semester, and I really missed that people factor. So I do understand where you're coming from. There are a few organizations locally in New York that do work. I always talk about Proud to be Latina, which is an organization based out of New York, and there's a once-a-month call for 50 minutes, which is free, and it addresses topics such as finance and leadership and personal development. And although it's a Latina-based organization, the speakers and the participants are from different ethnic backgrounds. There are males and females. In terms of public speaking, I talked about Toastmasters, and there are also local leadership groups like Georgia Leads and other programs in different organizations that are focusing on helping you develop your leadership skills over the course of several weeks or several months. There's an organization that is based in Chicago, is now in Washington, D.C., and as of this year also in New York, called Mujeres de ACE. It's the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement, and they address issues like networking successfully and leadership abilities and other things that we've touched on in this conversation. And then there are organizations like Latinas on the Plaza, which is based in Chicago, but does a little bit of national work as well, and they have one-day conferences. There are platforms on Facebook, such as Latinas Think Big, which are bringing together thousands of women through Facebook to write about what they're doing in society and celebrating accomplishments. And every Monday, you're able to share something that you've done or something that you need support with. And so you can do it from your computer, from your phone, from anywhere. So Googling accessing opportunities locally wherever your community is will definitely give you a start. And then the people that you meet through your network, through LinkedIn, through events that you do get to go to in person, can also connect you to opportunities and to other people that would lead to opportunities. But also not being afraid to ask. People will ask me things and I'll put them in touch with other people with resources and with opportunity. And so networking is a give and take. You definitely have to be willing to support someone if they ask you, but not being afraid to ask someone, hey, do you know of any opportunities where I'm able to connect with others virtually? And we learn something new every day.
Great. Thank you so much for so many great resources, Damary. Obviously, your work is in leadership, but you've addressed so many ways that it overlaps with social good and with
Yes.
social issues. How do you think that it really makes a difference in those spaces?
You mean the leadership development work?
Mm-hmm.
I definitely, the reason that I'm so passionate about leadership development is for what you just said exactly, the fact that it overlaps with so many areas of individual growth, individual development, professional development, but then also organizational development and how people work. And so, it's my personal view that we need to develop individually as leaders in order to fulfill certain roles of a position, whether it's an internship or a professional position, or even as a consultant, really being able to manage projects, to build and cultivate, as we've talked about, successful relationships, whether for networking, for carrying out the responsibilities of your job, or for being able to access opportunities to speak and to engage in other ways, just communicating effectively. And also, I think in the social sector, there's an emotional component. There's this term that I'm sure you've heard of, emotional intelligence, and being able to leverage that in the work that you do. And so I just love the opportunity to help people. I don't develop people. I help people develop themselves. And that's very exciting. And I talk about leadership development from a very personal level, then a family level, because so many of us as mothers, as wives, as daughters, as whatever role we play in our family, are taking on family responsibilities and playing a role in the way that our families operate. But then also, if you're in a religious institution, you might play a role there, in your local community at the grassroots level. And then for students, in terms of their educational institution, college organizations on campus, internships, and that sort of thing, there's always an opportunity for us to make an impact and to be a leader in different places and different arenas. So I think in terms of the greater good and improving life for everybody, it's important for us to develop as leaders.
Definitely. We've done some research over the last year, particularly in the nonprofit sector, and the limited opportunities to create a pipeline for women to move into roles of executive leadership or executive director roles within the nonprofit sector, and the lack of leadership development training in the sector. What would you say for organizations that are looking to figure out ways to increase their leadership development, particularly for their female staff, for those kind of executive director roles? We know that the nonprofit sector is growing and that there'll be a ton of spaces and opportunities when many of the baby boomers retire. What can we do now to address that?
So I think definitely preparation is key, right? Preparation is key in everything that we do, whether when it comes to scheduling, like we started off the conversation with, or when it comes to thinking about your next step and your stepping stone. And so there are a couple things. One is I always say live in the moment and enjoy the experiences you're having now. So if you're in an internship, enjoy what you're learning about there, be part of that, an active part of that, and be part of the conversation, stay abreast of trends, and so always being active, but thinking about how to leverage that. And that takes me to what you just asked. How do you think about preparing for some of the next steps? So there are a few reports that were published earlier this year in September and October. One was the Association for Women in Universities that talked about the pay gap that we all know about, right? The fact that women don't make as much as their male counterparts in the same role with the same or higher skill set and the same or higher education and credentials. So we have to keep that in the back of our mind. And then Catalyst released a report that talks about the corporate sector, the business sector. Women only make 4.4% of corporate CEOs, and as you go down that, that ladder to the workforce, women represent 45%. So keeping in mind and knowing what research says, what the facts are, that you're going in disadvantaged, but that you're not going to let that dictate where you're going. Being prepared to negotiate, to make a case for yourself, and to really shine to get and access that opportunity, I think is key. When it comes to women, in addition to the things we've talked about, such as education and leadership opportunities and courses, it's key to have a supportive network of people. So who is in your close circle that is going to encourage you, that is going to support you, that is going to push you, so that you have the right mentality, the positive mentality, even when those disadvantages are in your face, right? And so taking that to the level of the organization, I always say that organizations should invest in their people. Sometimes it's not going to happen by default, and so you have to make the case and be on top of things. There's this great conference happening. This is how much it costs. These are the sessions that are going to be facilitated at the conference that I think I need to participate in, and why. How is that going to help you be a better intern in the role that you're playing right now, or be better in whatever particular job it is? So I think being ahead of the game in all aspects, being on your toes all the time, being self-aware, understanding what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, how do those play into the role and the work that you're doing in your particular organization, in your particular community, and always working to improve yourself. Again, as I said earlier, not for the sake of others, but for your sake, because then you're going to be a better person and you're going to be able to change things for others as well.
Just a real kind of segue to your research a little bit. What interests you in the topic of Latino leadership? And is that kind of a bigger issue than maybe other forms of leadership development that organizations should be considering?
Well, that's an interesting question. So because of the situation to which I was born, and because I've always been the kind of person to look for a positive outcome and to look for, I guess, almost in a rebellious way, how to change things, right? For the positive, of course, and for the greater good, I think being a Latina by default and being born into the circumstances that I was born into put me in a position to look for options and opportunities. And so it wasn't until I got to undergrad pursuing my bachelor's degree that I met a Latina with a doctorate. And, Dr. Mireya Perez Bustillo is always close to my heart, and I stay in touch with her only by email. And recently I was thinking I have to do better at that, because it was understanding her experience as a Latina, as a woman who had accessed higher education, the experiences she had had in her travels, and all that I heard from her that really opened my eyes to possibility and opportunity. And I am a firm believer that I stand on the shoulder of many giants who have paved the way for me to access what I'm accessing, what I have accessed and what I am still accessing, but also that I have to be those shoulders for other people, for my boys that I'm raising, for my family, my community, and then for society at large. And so I think being who I was put me in the situation to look for positive opportunities. And when I pursued the doctorate, I definitely wanted to focus on leadership development for the reasons that I've mentioned, because it's a personal passion of mine. But I realized that I could contribute something, that I wasn't just writing my story, which I'm actually now in the process of doing through a project with other Latinas to be published next year, but it was telling the story of many Latinas across the United States who took the time and dedicated to telling what their experience was as a leader in the United States, how they had overcome some of these barriers that they grew up with and that they were faced with from birth, but also what were those positive influences and who were those people in their close circle that were encouraging them and pushing them. And so the fact that there are over 15 million Latinas over age 18 in the United States, and that the population is growing at the most rapid rate of all ethnic groups in the country, all of that came together for me to understand that I could make a difference in a small way, which has actually turned into a bigger way, because my research has been used as a foundation for conferences and events and programs. And I'll Google something and somebody wrote their graduation paper, right, based on my research, and a professor uses it in their class. And it's really exciting to know that one small contribution can have a greater impact, and that's a snowball effect. And I think we can all learn from that, because we can all do that. It doesn't mean that you have to write a dissertation, but there's an opportunity for you to do that in whatever role you're playing on a day-to-day basis. And so I am passionate about Latina leadership. I'm passionate about leadership in general. I'm passionate about women in leadership, because we are over half of the United States population, but yet we don't hold all of those significant leadership roles, and I have an issue with that. I'm excited that there is Sonia Sotomayor, who made a big stride in being able to achieve what she has achieved, and is a role model. But why aren't there more in the role that Sonia Sotomayor is? And why aren't there more Ursula Burns as women of color CEOs of Fortune 500 companies? And why aren't there more Ana Maria Chavez as the first woman of color and first Hispanic to lead an organization like the Girl Scouts of the USA? And that's what fuels me every day.
Yeah, you always feel like we've made so much progress, and then you'll read the first woman to do, or the first person of color, and you're like, my goodness, maybe we aren't as far as we thought. I think for women particularly, we've made so many strides in so many industries, but you're right, it's always kind of this standout kind of token position where you'll see one person, and one person kind of making that change. I think your point that, the person who inspired you was your professor, and we see how many people are in these positions who they have a responsibility to kind of almost make more room for others and to create those opportunities. Turning that question kind of on its head, what about people who are in positions of authority or leadership, or, like me running an organization? What can I do to increase the leadership development of those who are working for me, working under me, working with my organization, to create more of these conversations so that we can decrease those first-time situations and the kind of isolation that women face when they're put in positions of leadership?
I think you in your capacity asked the right question and are thinking from a really positive place about your own role and how you can make a difference. And so I think the first thing is being aware of who is in your organization, on your team, in other departments, just around you in any way that you can pull along wherever you're going. So when I've had interns, I've always taken the time not just to give them projects that need to get done, but also to expose them to different things. So this opportunity, for example, I've shared with students and with a lot of people, because I think being part of conversations means that you're paying attention, you're becoming, if you weren't, you're becoming more self-aware about what you need to do, as you mentioned earlier, to prepare to fill one of those positions that might open up, when all of these baby boomers retire, right? But also just to continue learning and continue growing. And I think creating opportunities as a manager for team building activities where people are able to see the strengths of others. In my organization, I was just on a staff retreat team, and for a couple months we worked on this first time retreat, because so many people work virtually, where everybody came together in person for a period of 2 days. And as we thought about the process, we really thought about where can we infuse the opportunity for people to learn about themselves and learn about others, learning about your own leadership style, learning about the leadership style of others, and being able to leverage some of those things. So I think as a manager, creating opportunities to facilitate that, I think staff retreats is definitely a good opportunity, taking people to events with you. And so sometimes the secretary, the administrative staff are overlooked and nobody invites them to a networking event or to a conference, yet they're the ones that engage with the public who calls there or comes there, and they really need to be an active part. And so my master's degree is in organizational communication, and I really wanted to pursue that because I wanted to think about and learn more about how an organization works. The fact that everybody, no matter how low they are on this totem pole, if you will, they have a key role. And sometimes we overlook that as managers. We're so busy with our day-to-day that we forget to pull people. So the fact that you're thinking about it, that you're asking the questions, that your team is putting together this forum for others to be part of that as well, I think is very helpful. I think communication and being very flexible to the feedback and the response that you get from the people on your team and from your colleagues is key, because sometimes we think we're doing a great job and we may not be. Oftentimes issues that I have had, whether it's at work or in consulting opportunities, have been with other women in terms of negotiation, in terms of conversation, in terms of competition and being seen as competition, when really we can leverage one another's strengths. And I think, that's key. I think that it's never too much of an investment to invest in others, especially as a manager. You want to improve employee morale, and you want to improve employees' confidence in themselves, because you hope that that's going to translate to staff retention, and that's going to translate to a positive work environment. So definitely investing in others, creating opportunities, communication as a two-way street. And I think sharing your own experiences, because sometimes we don't want to talk about personal things in the workplace, but someone, as the young ladies here have said, I'm thinking about doing something you did, or I'm thinking about, how I can do something you did, and sharing your experience opens up that possibility. So I understand the fine line, about personal situations and conversations, but sharing what are some of the challenges you have faced, how you overcame them, and really inspiring them to do great things as well.
Okay. I want to take a moment to just announce 2 programs that we're doing, and then give Jade and Heather, if they have any final questions for you, as well as to allow people from the audience, if you do, feel free to type a question and we'll add it. We are joining, tired obviously today. We are launching a community leadership fellowship program, an opportunity for people who are looking to one day lead organizations in the nonprofit or social sector, so social ventures, social entrepreneurs. Our Community Leadership Institute will launch in 2016, which is a 3-month intensive leadership development program for those that are kind of mid-career professionals. So you're interested in being an executive director, you're interested in running an organization, you get a chance to network and think about how to address and lead in your community. So I did want to put that offer up. If you are interested, definitely click the link if you're in the live conversation. And if not, you can look on our website at sistergroup.org/community-leader. Jade, Heather, any questions for Damary before I ask my final 2, or we take any from the audience?
Yeah, I was wanting to ask you, it's more related to your work that you've done with diversity and inclusion. I was wondering, first, what are some of the organizations you've worked with, and what are some of the major challenges within these organizations in terms of diversity and inclusion that you've seen, like some of the most common themes that are still issues?
You ask great questions. Diversity and inclusion is a topic that's also of personal passion to me, because of a lot of injustices that I have seen. I've worked with corporations, professional groups, religious institutions, educational institutions, mostly higher ed, and what I have seen is that women have a difficult time climbing the ladder to achieve some of those high visible roles. I have seen that people of color, and especially women of color, have a really hard time. And so again, going back to being in those disadvantaged categories, I get frustrated when I see those situations, but I'm not the kind of person to sit around and just watch and just be frustrated. And so what can I do about it? And what I do is tap my leadership development expertise and really support people in the process. So yesterday I had a conversation with a woman in higher education at an institution who has been there for a long time, is doing great work, and was considering, just like you, pursuing her doctorate. And after we talked about it, I said, well, you don't have an excuse, right? We've addressed all of the issues and concerns that you had, and now you just have to go do it. And so charging people with a call to action, and saying to you, you're thinking about pursuing your doctorate, you've done all of these great things, you're completing this internship, and you're going to contribute to this very important topic that you're focusing on. So then I want to charge you and say, all right, Jade, I'll be, checking in on you and asking, not if you completed your doctorate down the road, but when you completed your doctorate. And so the diversity and inclusion work really plays to a lot of different things that we do. I think it goes hand in hand with the leadership development, with personal and professional development. The fact that, as I mentioned, some of those statistics are still real, that women have fought for the right to vote, but yet women are still not at the highest levels of society, although we're qualified, we're intelligent, a lot of us are prepared and have the credentials. And so when you do work that hard to achieve certain levels of acceptance and you still face that glass ceiling, you referred to that article. That article was the basis for a conversation with a group of 100 college students who also wanted to talk about the glass ceiling because they faced it as students, and their faculty and staff faced it in their roles. And so being able to find that common ground, that whether you're starting your career or you're in your career, those are some of the challenges that you're going to face as a female or as a person of color or as both. And so thinking about how do you empower people to develop themselves, to prepare themselves so that, as I said earlier, they can make the case and say, well, so I have these degrees or I have these amount of years of experience, I have this expertise, this is my network that I can tap for this position, here, all of these great things. So what's the problem? Why am I not being able to access that and being able to negotiate for yourself? In California, there's a leadership institute for women that focuses on negotiation. And there's a lot of great work happening around empowering women by teaching them the negotiation skills that they need, whether it's to advocate for a pay raise or advocate for a position that you know you deserve. Doesn't mean you're going to get that one. But it means that if you don't, you're going to get frustrated enough that you're going to be able to turn that around and say, okay, then that means I probably have to look outside of this organization. That means I have to go to that network that I've been building, to those people who I've been cultivating relationships with, and ask for some support and be able to go somewhere else. And just knowing that you can, I think, is empowering in itself.
Have you ever, Damary, had pushback from someone where you've kind of proposed a particular way of thinking or a particular way of increasing their diversity or inclusion within their organization or within their work, and they, I know I sometimes with my clients kind of, they want to continue with what they know and they just want you to kind of rubber stamp that. Exactly. You run into that in your work? And how have you've gotten past that?
I'm an honest person, so you're treading on a fine line here. I'm teasing. I think that is a very real experience for anybody working with other human beings, right? Because everybody thinks that they are, that they have a diverse team, that the organization is diverse. They think because they have a diverse team and the organization is diverse that they're inclusive. And they're not, the terms are not connected in that way. Just because you're diverse doesn't mean that you're inclusive, and just because you believe in diversity doesn't mean that you're creating an inclusive environment. And so there is always pushback. It doesn't always come from a negative place, I should say that. A lot of times it's lack of education. And when I addressed education earlier, I talked about formal and informal, and those are teachable moments, opportunities to say to somebody, I understand how it looks because you have somebody from this demographic group and somebody from that. Your team of 5 represents 5 different demographic groups, and that's great, but yet they're all working in silo. They feel left out. They don't feel like they're a team. So it's not an inclusive group. It's not an inclusive team. And how do you get there? And so I think taking everything with a grain of salt and saying, okay, not everybody is thinking about this from a negative perspective, so let me put myself in their position. And that's where some of those skills that I mentioned earlier come into play, the effective communication, the team building strategies, but also the listening skills and being an active listener to understand where somebody is coming from, and also to meet people where they are. Anytime that I facilitate a diversity and inclusion session, The first 15 minutes of the session will give me an idea of where the group is. And I try to approach everything from a personal perspective first, because you can't talk about organizational diversity and inclusion until you can help people understand, be self-aware of, and face some of those biases and some of those things that they come to the table with, right? So what are some of those notions about a particular ethnic group that you grew up with, whether you were told that at home, whether you learned it in the media, whether you had an experience that caused you to internalize this, and how do we support you through different tools and conversation and facilitating a really comfortable environment? How do we facilitate you working through some of that? It doesn't mean that you're going to change your mind today and in this conversation, but it means that you're going to become aware of a bias that you may not have known you had before that conversation, or maybe you did and you just didn't have to face it in that way. So definitely keeping conversation open and being prepared to deal with the pushback as part of the process. I say that diversity and inclusion is never a topic in which the expert has arrived. It's changing every day, it's evolving every day, and if you feel like you know everything about the topic, you probably should sit down and be part of some conversations, because it changes as demographics shift across the country, and people don't fit into these little boxes anymore. So you can't just check off I'm black or white. There's brown, there's Hispanic, there's Asian, and there are all of these other ethnic groups and racial groups that are now represented, and then you throw in mixed, and all of a sudden the conversation is completely different and above some people's head. So continuous engagement, continuous dialogue about these topics, I think is definitely key.
Yeah, I think that was kind of a great little soundbite, or I don't know what you would say, that you can be diverse as an organization, but that doesn't mean you're inclusive. I think, your point about this topic being so broad, I mean, you can look at diversity through a particular lens, whether it's gender or race or LGBT or sexuality or religion, or, there's so many things, ability, or where you grew up, all these things that may not seem urban, suburban, rural, urban. All of these things can lead to a conversation around what does diversity mean, and for your organization, what does it mean to meet that goal and those topics. So I love that, and that'll be kind of our takeaway from this conversation. I want to thank you so much, Damary, for sharing your expertise and pushing through even with the technical difficulties. We're really excited, and we'll have to have you back to talk about this again, to even build on it even more. I do want to draw attention to some of our services. Again, like I mentioned, we do have our Community Leadership Institute. We also are offering through the rest of 2015 a discount on ISC individual membership. So if you're looking for training and professional development, leadership skills, leadership opportunities, definitely take advantage of this opportunity to save a little bit on training in the new year. And the speaker series will continue. December 10th, we have Trish Shum from the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network, who will be talking about her career journey. And you can join us by looking at sisgigroup.org/career series to see who the speaker is each month. It's a free and open dialogue, and we're really excited to have such great speakers like Damary participate in this event. Thank you so much for your time and for participating, and everyone have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll talk to you next month. Take care.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everyone.